Half a day. The Committee on Health, Land, Justice, and Culture is now called to order. Today's Tuesday, September 2022, and the time is 3:11 p.m. Notices for this confirmation hearing were sent via email to all senators and all main media broadcasting outlets and published in the Guam Daily Post on Tuesday, September 13, and again on Friday, September 16, 2022. Individuals testifying shall first be recognized by the chair before speaking and begin by stating their name for record-keeping purposes. So today's agenda is the appointment of Dr. Marilyn C. Salas to serve as a member, COSAS Museum Board of Advisors, for a term length of 4 years, from August 27, 2022 to August 26, 2026, to fill the vacant SINA representative member. I'd like to acknowledge the presence of Senator Terlaje and thank her for being here today. Thank you, Senator. Dr. Salas, thank you for accepting this appointment to serve as a SINA representative member of the COSAS Museum Board of Advisors. Thank you to those who are here today to present testimony. The COSAS, or Guam Museum, is mandated to promote increased understanding of Guam's geology, biota, prehistory, history, and contemporary culture. As the official repository and custodian of historical artifacts of Guam, COSAS is mandated to acquire, preserve, and make available for public viewing artifacts and archival materials relating to the cultural, historical, and natural heritage of Guam. Created within the corporation, the Department of Chamorro Affairs, is a COSAS Board of Advisors, which consists of 5 members appointed by a Magahagan Guahan, subject to advice and consent of the legislature. So one of the members is a SINA representative, one is a Manhoban representative, and one shall be a member with extensive formal experience or education in Guam history or museum administration. All right, so today we have signed up to testify Mr. Melvin Wampat Borja, who is the Director of the Department of Chamorro Affairs. Please proceed.
Hafaday Speaker, Hafaday Senator Terlaje. My name is Melvin Wampat Borja. I am the President of the Department of Chamorro Affairs and the Executive Director of the Commission on Decolonization. And I'd like to present this testimony in support of Dr. Marilyn Salas. Hafaday Senators, as I said, my name is Melvin Wampat Borja, and this testimony is in support of Dr. Marilyn Salas to become a member of the COSAS Board of Advisors for the Guam Museum. Dr. Salas has built a career and reputation as a staunch advocate for Chamorro cultural preservation and advancement. She was the chair of the Education Quality Committee for the Senator Antonio M. Palomo Guam Museum, which helped to develop the educational content for the Guam Museum's permanent exhibit. She has also been deeply involved in the development of various cultural resources and programs that serve our people. Most recently, Dr. Marilyn has been extremely active in the Guam Museum Foundation, which has helped to raise valuable resources for the museum operations and upkeep of our facility. She also remains active with the Met Cow Market at the Chamorro Village, which is a division of DCA, working to improve sustainable food practices and food security for the people of Guam. Dr. Salas has an impressive record of meaningful contributions toward cultural preservation and advancement, which will help serve her well on the COSAS board. Additionally, her academic background and her experience in helping to develop the educational content for the museum exhibits, along with her awareness of our public function, fiscal challenges, and educational value will provide her with the critical perspective necessary to ensure that the museum is supported and prepared as we move forward. I am confident that Dr. Marilyn Salas will fulfill these duties at the highest degree. Thank you for your time and consideration of Dr. Salas, and I am hopeful that you will confirm her as a COSAS board member. Suzuas Masi.
Thank you, President Wampat Borja. We'll now hear from the nominee herself, Dr. Salas.
Speaker Terlaje and Senator Terlaje, I want to thank
Just a minute.
Speaker Terlaje and Senator Terlaje, I want to thank you for this opportunity to speak. My name is Marilyn Salas. I also want to thank Melvin Borja, President of DCA, and Leona Young, Director of the Guam Museum, for being persistent in believing that I should be on the COSA's advisory board. I want to thank the governor for appointing me to the COSA's board as sign-up representative. If confirmed, I promise to do my best to keep the museum moving upwards in its approach, informed by current trends in successful museums. Museums are dynamic places. They have the power to create change and bring people together. I liken the Antonio Palomo Guam Museum and Education Facility to the Halamtano, the jungle. In Guam's dense Halamtano, there is much to explore. We must take advantage of the opportunity to discover by looking deep within and wondering beyond what we see. In our Halamtana, we must be aware of our surroundings using all our senses to see culture and history through the landscape, flora, fauna, and artifacts left behind by our ancestors. The Guam Museum presents culture and history through cultural artifacts and exhibits, history timelines, videos, interviews, many times with sound effects to capture the moment. Like all museums, knowledge is presented and each individual discovers and inquires. A Department of Chamorro survey and my personal poll of visitors at the museum reinforce the importance and wealth of knowledge in our Guam Museum. Visitors who I've talked to are totally impressed with our museum. It was designed to present our Chamorro journey, I Hinanauta, through story. For the Chamorro people, the Guam Museum builds our self-esteem and gives us a sense of place. This is only the beginning. The museum can expand with more online programs for those living abroad, exhibits of the various cultural groups in our island and in the Marianas, unique math and science features such as Mount Lamlam and the Marianas Trench, global warming, oceanography in Micronesia, island life, hospitality, diversity, and more. It is an iconic place that we can call ours. It would do well for the Guam Museum to become an autonomous entity that still remains connected to the Guam Department of Chamorro Affairs for cultural advisement and partial government funding support. A key role of the president of DCA is that he is the final reviewer of cultural messaging from the museum before it goes out to the public. We work so hard to bring it to this place and time. Let's keep it going and take our Guam Museum to a higher level with and for younger generations of Guamanians and visitors to our island. I humbly ask for your support of my appointment to the COSAS Advisory Board as a SINA representative. Jesus Masi.
Jesus Masi, Dr. Salas. Thank you also to Dr. Anzito Walter for being present and support. And all right, in reviewing your nomination packet, it's I'm just going to read excerpts from it for the people who are listening. Dr. Salas received her BA and Master's in Education from the University of Guam, obtained her PhD in Reading from the University of Arizona. She retired as an Associate Professor of UOG's Richard F. Taitano Micronesian Area Research Center and served as Director of the Center for Chamorro Language and Culture at the University of Guam. She's taught culture and education courses for the School of Education, was the chairperson of the advisory board for the Department of Chamorro Affairs, and is also a current board member of the Guam Preservation Trust. She worked at the Department of Education as a teacher, reading specialist, dean of the College of Education at the University of Guam, research assistant, associate professor at MARC. Currently is a self-employed farmer. Her professional involvements include the Guam Historic Review Board, Guam Preservation Trust Board, Guam Museum Foundation Board, International Reading Association, Pacific Islands Bilingual Bicultural Association, Chamorro Conference. Community civic involvement includes development of the Antonio Paloma Guam Museum and Education Facility, summer camps for tennis, the South Pacific Games. Publications and presentations, I'm sure, are more numerous than what were listed here, but some of them include status of the Chamorro language research, first Chamorro conference papers compiled, presentation at Pacific Islands Library Association in Pohnpei, International Reading Association on Guam, presentations at Pacific Islands Bilingual Bicultural Association, paper and presentation at Language Planning Workshop in Suva, Fiji. So I want to thank you, Dr. Salas, of course, for lending and agreeing to serve in this capacity after serving in these other capacities and continuing to serve in some of these other capacities. I'm sure that your input will be very valuable to this advisory council. If I may ask a couple questions just to be sure, do you have any continuing business or other conflicts of interest that may affect your ability to perform your duties as a board member?
I do not.
Are you still on the museum, what is it, the foundation?
I am.
Okay, and so you see there's no conflict that you can see or anticipate there?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I think, because one is fundraising, but the
Yeah.
other is directing,
It's like they serve,
advising.
yeah, so they serve the same purpose, right? Hopefully. Okay, and then the Preservation Trust, hopefully those are also just compatible, consistent.
I'm no longer on the Guam
Oh, you're not?
Preservation Trust.
Okay, then
Yes.
we're wrong. Okay, okay then. Will you have any challenges to attend the board meetings?
I don't believe so.
All right, and thank you for your testimony today where you outlined what you look for in the museum and what you hope it's going to continue to perpetuate for our visitors and our community itself. I don't know if you were following. So recently, September, it says, the Office of the Governor and the Department of Chamorro Affairs announced that they have secured $300,000 to invest in repairs and maintenance of the museum. And this maintenance of the museum, of course, I think is a concern. I mean, if it's a beautiful place, very beautiful, but I think it also is becoming more and more obvious, right, that it's in need of maintenance. But later on, this was clarified that part of this money, or a bulk of it, is actually going to be used to connect. It's a walkway. Is that right? No? I thought Dr. Bivacqua had clarified that on his Facebook post. That
It's an awning to help mitigate the water damage.
the 300,000?
Correct.
Okay, so this is not part of the funds that will be used to connect the Chamorro Village and
No, ma'am.
the museum?
No.
Okay,
That's
so the awning is for where?
It's for the rear of the museum. There's water damage to the second floor. When it rains, it just drops right onto the second floor, and it eventually starts to pool, and it's creating some leaking issues down into the lobby.
Oh, I see.
And so the awning is really just so that when it rains, the water runoff goes down onto the bottom floor and the exterior rather than pooling onto the second floor.
Okay, so this is an awning in an area that has no cover at all right now?
Correct.
All right, and is there other source of funding then that was talked about in the newspaper recently?
Hot bond, QC, and part of it was a general fund appropriation.
Okay, and that's the money to create that walkway?
No, the walkway is a separate, what you're referring to is a pedestrian overpass.
Yes.
Quite frankly, we're not even close on that one. What we're attempting the pedestrian overpass was actually a project that was a part of the Hagatnya master plan. And all we're doing right now is exploring whatever available grant funding we can get awarded so that we can start with the A&E.
All right, well, that's not, I think, what was discussed in the newspaper or...
Yeah, that's
the
a
social media.
separate effort. But we've just only begun that. We're
Okay,
not-
so the money that you've got for maintenance, yeah, it's. I just want to ask, is there a plan? Is there like a long-term plan for the museum that lays out when different maintenance, like a maintenance schedule?
That's one of the things that has been a challenge for us, is that we've only recently transitioned out of private contracted management and into public management. And this is one of the things that we're challenged with, is trying to rebuild all of these maintenance plans for the upkeep of the museum. So we have, all of the basics in place, like the janitorial contracts and the groundskeeping, but some of the pricier ones include like the HVAC service. So right now this is one of the major challenges, is that the HVAC units are waning, and they've been requiring fairly consistent service and repair. And so they will eventually need to be replaced. We've already started budgeting and working on the procurement for those units. They're, obviously quite costly. And so we've included funding, or the budget for the maintenance service plan to go along with that purchase. So that way there's a guarantee for consistent maintenance for the life of the unit, or at least we would have to do it in a 5-year cycle.
When you say HVAC, do you mean the entire air conditioning system is no longer good?
It's not that it's no longer good, it's just not operating at its full capacity.
So we're going to replace it?
Yes.
How old is the museum HVAC system?
About 7 years, which is definitely not as long as it should have lasted longer.
We're having similar issues here. Some of the stuff that was signed off on does not seem to be appropriate. I think we're having HVAC problems. We're having leaking issues.
Yeah, part of the challenge, Speaker, is our proximity to the ocean.
No, I don't think so. I mean, well, maybe.
Well, I'm not sure about your unit, but we're definitely seeing that type of corrosion.
But all of this, they know when they design the buildings, and they should be able to anticipate, and whoever's contracting on behalf of the government of Guam should be able to ask their architects, are you planning that we live right near the ocean? Are you putting in systems that are going to work for us, and for what period? And I think it has to be reasonable. Anyways, the reason why I'm questioning just that part is because there's a lot of concern in the community that museums, a new building, for example, our schools are super old, and we're juggling money to, put in HVAC systems at the schools, obviously, in the hospital, obviously, and we have to now deal with putting HVAC systems in the museum. And I just think we all have to be as diligent as possible in our roles when we are, approving, contracting, procuring, and everything that we are doing, that we are getting value, and that, yeah. And Director, President, if I could ask, so this transition you described from the contract, there used to be a contractor that ran the museum, isn't that 3 or 4 years old by now? I mean, didn't it transition 3 or 4 years ago?
No, it's been about maybe a little over a year.
So when were you appointed? 4 years, right?
No, I started at DCA in 2020.
Okay, so 2 years.
The end of 2020.
All right. Okay. It's just that, yeah. So yes, we did talk about this before. So I just want to make sure we're actually progressing and not just staying in the same place. But yeah, so that contract ended, sorry, when did you say?
Let's see, I started in 2020. We closed in the early part of 2021.
All right.
2021,
Okay.
not too long ago.
Yeah.
All right, so Dr. Salas, sorry, back to this. But wanted to just question, when you said you want the museum to be an autonomous agency, what do you mean by that?
I think it needs to stand alone in many ways, but the cultural aspects is still with the Department of Chamorro Affairs. And, you know, what the department does and what it stands for is what the museum represents. So I think that they should be collaborative in their approach to how things get done, and even with the financial support that it could get. I don't believe it can be fully autonomous, but we find a way to do that. Looking at maybe how the park, the Warren the Park Museum operates. So it's a matter of studying what is most effective for us.
All right. Yeah, I'm curious what details you're proposing for autonomy, because, for example, the Warren, the Pacific Park, is part of the Park Service, part of the U.S. federal government, for sure. Unless you mean autonomous normally means self-sufficient. You're going to bring in your own revenue, and you're going to pay for all this maintenance and reconstruction that needs to be done, and everything. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of agencies come in here and say we need to be autonomous when really they have no source of revenue. And that's probably the next issue I'm going to discuss with you is this. So the museum, when it was under contractor, was supposed to establish fees. Well, according to the hot bond and everything else that happened after that, it was funded by the hot bond. And I heard recently that the museum was paid for by the Department of Defense. Mr. President, can you please clear the record on that? Was our museum funded by hot bonds or the Department of Defense?
To my understanding, the museum was in some way connected to the military realignment and the impact, because there was funding that came from the federal side, but I'm not quite sure. I mean, this is not I was not around at that time. But I'm not sure exactly what the contribution was from DOD, but it was definitely a part of even congressional conversations about the buildup on Guam and what funding would be allocated for this effort.
They were supposed to, and what happened is they did not. If you read the programmatic agreement, it says they're supposed to fund, and they did not. And I want you to research that, please, and make it very clear, because this repeated statement I don't think is accurate. And if I'm wrong, then please correct me. But I know for a fact that the people of Guam paid very good money. It was the top priority. It was the number one reason for those hot bonds. So we paid bonds. We used bonds to fund this museum. And I want you to read the programmatic agreement and read the part in there that says that the Department of Defense will fund or try to fund or explore funding for a museum and cultural place. But I've attended these programmatic agreements meetings, and in one of them, they declared that they tried and were not able to. So I very much want that clarified, and people of Guam should be given absolute credit for what they have spent their hard-earned tax dollars to fund.
I believe there was a repository.
Oh, yeah, that's for sure. Yeah, that's
sure.
separate though.
Yeah. But under the museum.
So about the fees, so part of the, I guess the deal was that they were supposed to establish fees. And the problem was that I read the documents when they first proposed it in order to get funding under the hot bonds. And the fees were like $25, or I can't remember exactly, but they were high fees, right, to enter. This is to enter the museum, that type of fee. And I don't think those kind of fees have actually ever been implemented. And so like right now we operate at a donation level that's much lower than that. Thankfully for me, because I want all of the people of Guam to be able to access this and to get in there. So that was kind of delayed for many years. I think it's still not an official fee schedule that we have, and I just want to put that on your radar. So when we talk about autonomy, the proposal I saw that would make the museum independently funded involved a very high fee, even for, locals. So just if you could take a look at that, and maybe we'll have a more detailed discussion with all of the parties involved. Senator Taitzky, any questions or comments for the panel?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And good afternoon, Dr. Salas. And of course to you, President Wampat Borja. Thank you so much for being here today. And I want to thank you as well for stepping up to the plate again for yet another board to sit on. You've been very active, and it's to our advantage that you are, being a part of these boards because of your wealth of knowledge. I think your personality alone is just very invigorating to a lot of people, and it gets them going, it gets them motivated, to do things. And I'm sure that you can bring that to that group of members on this board to get them moving, because from fundraising is one thing, and that takes a lot, but then also trying to preserve our culture and present it in a way that people are interested, especially our next generation, and get them involved is a whole line itself. And I think you can do that. You have that ability to do that. And I want to thank you so much for continuing on serving. And President Wampat Borja, a lot of times I drive by, especially during the rainy season, where everyone sees the lake that formulates behind the museum. And I don't know, it's been there for happening like that ever since. So is there any plans at all to find some type of drainage system somewhat to try to eliminate the lake that's formed every time it rains, so that people still have the ability to just, not be worried about walking in that area and sinking or something, or even providing damage to the area?
What you see there during heavy rains in Skinner Plaza is a deliberate design. It's called a ponding basin, and it's built for water runoff mitigation. And that's because this area in Hagåtña has been, drastically developed, and there is insufficient watershed here in Hagåtña. And because of this area, the way that it lays, it naturally kind of brings a lot of water to settle in one area. And so that was constructed deliberately to be a ponding basin in the center so that the water can be absorbed into the land rather than running off into the storm drain. There are things that can be done to change it, but it then requires that runoff water goes elsewhere, which more than likely is the storm drain. And that's really what it was designed to avoid. So the Skinner Plaza is a part of DCA jurisdiction. We do maintain the plaza. It is something that we are aware of, and we, have explored other alternatives. But to date, the vast majority of the alternate designs require that runoff to be redirected into the storm drain. So, it's kind of a double-edged sword. It's unfortunate that the park is not usable during heavy rain and when it is ponding, but we're either choosing, in access to the park or, further runoff damage to our environment. So, it's something that, quite frankly, that's not my area of expertise.
Well, thank you so much for that, but it's just such a waste of area when we're seeing more and more people come down to the plaza from everything from the Christmas lights, that are happening, the food trucks that are coming down here, and people having events down here, and it's not even in a heavy rain, it pretty much fills. But I'm sure that if there is an opportunity that you can look, someone might even bring a suggestion your way. I'm sure this legislature would try and find help for DCA or the museum to address that. But yeah, the water has to go somewhere, and hopefully we can find a remedy to that that will be a win-win for all of us. But I appreciate all the hard work you're doing, President, and of course, Dr. Salas, again, Sijus Masi, Donklu Sijus Masi, and appreciate your time. Okay, and your family's time, because I know this takes away time from your other side, your other half, so thank you so much for letting her serve too as well. Thank you, Dr. Alter.
Thank you, Senator. Okay, just to clarify, Mr. President, can you just clarify which items are on the COSAS board agenda that you think are like the most pressing that the COSAS board is going to address in the near future?
On are you referring to the next meeting agenda?
Well, not literally, in the near future.
Oh,
Yes.
you
What
mean
are the
like
big
our-
things that a nominee should know?
So just to
Yes.
clarify, the Department of Chamorro Affairs has a board of trustees, which is our governing board, and the COSAS board is an advisory board specifically for the Guam Museum. And so normally what we do is we hold the COSAS board meetings prior to the board of trustees meetings so that we can bring the advisement from the COSAS board to the board of trustees, who ultimately makes the final decisions. So, the information coming from the COSAS board really comes in recommendation form. That said, the more active our COSAS board is, the better or the greater impact they have on the decisions made by the board of trustees. The primary focus for the COSAS board is really going to be in building the capacity of the Guam Museum and expanding its ability to care for the collection. Just to give you kind of a concrete example, the not too recently, but the cathedral exhibit, there was previously a museum at the cathedral across the street, and they have since had to close their doors. And so we've been in conversation with the cathedral leadership for quite some time, trying to come up with a solution for how we can bring that collection into the Guam Museum. And that work really is helped a lot by engagement with the COSAS board. The COSAS board, for example, Dr. Rubenstein is one of our board members. He's got a lot of, wealth of knowledge and experience. And, that type of advisement, assessment, and engagement between our board and a body like the cathedral is absolutely helpful, because their primary concern is the care of the artifacts when they come into our control. And so the COSAS board really is critical in the sense that we depend on them to help strategize on, what are the appropriate investments for the Guam Museum, what are the, priorities in terms of programming. But we really rely on the technical expertise to inform the board of trustees, because we don't have a museology expert or an artifact or collection expert sitting on the board of trustees.
All right, thank you. And what do you mean by investments?
Sorry?
Investments?
Oh, it's just, it's really more, there's, like we were talking about earlier, right? There's obvious places where we need to invest in the facility. Some investments have a greater impact than others, in terms of, how it affects what our mandated responsibilities are. The HVAC is one of those critical pieces, right? The HVAC has to maintain at a certain level to prevent humidity and mold damage to the artifacts. And so it's really more about us asserting what the priorities are for the department, because the Board of Trustees will make decisions not only for the Guam Museum, but also for the Chamorro Village. And so it's, it's important for us to be able to bring the perspective of the COSAS board, whose primary charge is the museum operations and that facility, so that, we can kind of balance out which division gets what.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Dr. Salas, yeah. I'm very confident that with your skills and background and your current work, that you're going to be able to bring all of those together and further pursuit of expansion for the museum, expanded programs, expanded investment, technical expertise, whatever it is that the museum needs at any different time. I'm glad that you were involved in the beginning and the whole education plan for that museum. And but I just hope, even though our museum is so beautiful, that we cannot, take for granted. We have to actively work on all its other duties, right? It is the official repository and custodian of historical artifacts. It's mandated to continue to acquire and preserve. And I know, as the president say, we are challenged now, for space and resources in order to do that adequately. So I don't think this work is easy, and I think it's going to be what you bring to it, right? The amount of time and energy and pursuit of, different things. So, but I am confident that if you decided to do that, then that you are going to do that to your full abilities, because I've seen you do this in very many occasions.
And the museum is always a dynamic entity, so the museum is always dynamic.
Yes.
And so there are things in there where we really need to look at the management plan. In studying museums, it's about what is the curatorial plan? What is the maintenance plan? What are all the things, because this is an education facility. And it's about also, as it is a government, as it is under the Department of Chamorro Affairs, how quickly can the government move to make this work? Because there are the fees, as you talked about, that we had difficulty, even when we changed the fee schedule, getting passed through, even with the credit card machine and its use. And so this would help, even with the Guam Museum Foundation, make things work better so that we can get membership going, we can get contributions from the public, and all these will help support the present museum and how it becomes more autonomous to me, That's what we want it to become.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you again to everyone here in support. There being no additional individuals to present for the testimony, this committee will consider the nomination of Dr. Marilyn C. Salas as the member of the Cosas Museum Board of Advisors, signed a representative, was duly heard. The public hearing is now adjourned. The time is 3:50, looks like 3:49 p.m. Situs Masi.